The following segment comes from a full SEC preview episode from Running Out the Clock. If you like what you hear in this segment, then be sure and subscribe to the channel so that you can catch all of our SEC previews, including whether or not we think the teams discussed in these previews will do better, worse, or the same this season. We have to move on to the Florida Gators over in the East, finishing in that fifth spot, mirroring Texas A&M. 3-5 win-loss record. Of course, a lot of frustrations there. And then one of the weirdest coaching situations I've ever seen.
So weird.
Strange.
With McElwain and him faking death threats, apparently. Just strange. Just strange. They have Dan Mullen now. They have a guy that they think they're hoping is the guy who rights the ship, brings them back to the days of Urban Meyer. And Dan is, excited to be back at the place where really his career got going. No offense to Utah, but this is where it put his name on the map. Keith, we're going to turn it over to you. What do the Gators look like this season?
Well, there's some excitement around the program for the first time in a while, and for pretty good reason. Dan Mullen is he's familiar with the school. He's familiar with the recruiting grounds. He's familiar with the AD who came over from state. So they know each other well. They're friends. Even when Florida got rid of Muschamp and they brought in McElwain, there was some excitement that we were finally getting like another offensive guy, because the offense under Muschamp was really bizarre. Like in his 4 years,
was there an offense under Muschamp? I feel like you couldn't technically call it that.
Technically,
like for legal reasons.
The offense moved the ball and scored some points.
I don't remember those.
But Florida had 3 OCs in 4 years under Muschamp.
No consistency.
It was just weird, and so we get McElwain, and he doesn't pan out at all. People will look at the results and say, "Oh, well, Florida won 11 games and 10 games, and they went to the SEC championship in his second year." But that was also when the SEC East was kind of Florida and Georgia, and then a bunch of like JV teams from high school. The SEC East was super weak, so Florida went to 2 SEC championship games just because, basically by default. So bringing Dan Mullen in, again by default, brings some excitement in because there's some comfortability there.
Comfortability?
Yeah, that's a word.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm going to fact check this. Like, I'm willing to accept it as like a word in the moment, like no question. I'm all about that word right then. I don't know technically.
It is a word. I looked.
Okay.
It's a word according to yourdictionary.com. I don't know how reliable of a source that is.
Well, it's your dictionary, Chandler.
Right. You're the one who started.
Yeah. I hope you would accept this. Anyway, so there's some comfortability there. Last year, they were 108th nationally in total offense. They were second to last in the SEC in total yards. Somehow behind the train wreck that was the Tennessee offense. Somehow. So, Florida returns a lot of. Well, I say a lot. They return a decent amount of talent on the offensive side of the ball. So, like last week, Chandler said,
they certainly return a lot of players.
Yes, they have.
The question is kind of where they're
guys in uniforms coming back on offense.
Yeah.
Chandler last week said that Ole Miss, if you look at the offensive side of the ball, there's a lot of good things to say about it, and it's the exact opposite on defense. Well, it's kind of the exact opposite for Florida. Florida's defense has been really, really good for the last 7, 8, 9 years. Top 10, top 5 nationally every year, basically. But it's the offense that it's like a horror movie.
Which one? If you had to pick a horror movie that Florida's offense would be in, like what would it be for you?
Like any one of like the Friday the 13th movies, just because it's not good, it's not fun to watch, but there's a lot of people dying. That's the best way to describe Florida Gator offense the last several years. So,
well done.
Yeah. So Felipe Franks, who was a highly recruited quarterback that flipped to Florida from LSU, he's pretty much got the job to start this year. It's his to lose. He'll be pushed by Kyle Trask, who showed some promise, but at this point is really just a backup. Emory Jones is going to be the quarterback of the future, I think, for Florida. He's the guy. He was like the 4th ranked, quote unquote, dual threat quarterback coming out of high school this year. He was committed to Ohio State and then flipped to Florida whenever Dan Mullen made the switch. So he's early enrolled. He got some time in.
Do you think he's probably a red shirt guy this year, though?
I think he will be.
Looking like, okay.
Yeah, just because Franks is young, Trask is young, so they want to give Emory Jones as much time learning and kind of preparing to be like the guy in 2 or 3 years. They got some talent at receiver. They're just young. They need seasoning. Joey Callaway left a year early. Tyree Cleveland comes back. He's going to be a good option going down the outside of the field, like stretch the field. There's a lot of question marks at tight end and at that like wide receiver on the inside. I don't know what's going to happen there. But that's kind of been Florida's crutch the last, I don't know, since like 08, 09. They just haven't had a wide receiving core that's been good past like one person, and not having good wide receiver depth is a killer for offense. Even offenses that run a more pro style offense that rely more heavily on the run game, which Florida did for a while, you still have to have good wide receivers, and they just haven't had that for a long time. So I think that's going to be a critical part of Dan Mullen's recruitment coming into this year and next year.
Well, that raises a question that I have to interject and ask. That was one of the biggest complaints about Dan Mullen's tenure at Mississippi State was his inability to really lock down wide receivers. Does that worry you at all? Yeah.
Because
that was a dumb question. Does it worry you that he has a reputation? Well, of course it does.
Not at all, whatever. No, but spread offenses need good wide receivers just as much as running gun and pro style. Well, wide receivers give you balance to good offense, and so maybe it'll be different in Florida. I don't know, but one of the good things about their offense is that their offensive line is a year older. They have veterans. They should be better this year than they were last year, and the offensive line wasn't the worst thing about the offense last year. So I guess that's a plus. I guess.
Gotta find it wherever you can,
Yeah. So Jordan Scarlett's coming back this year after being gone last year because of that ridiculous credit card scam thing that he and like nine other players pulled.
I forgot about that.
Most of those guys aren't coming back. Jordan Scarlett's one of the ones that actually is. And if you paid any attention to him in the 16 season, he was a lot of fun to watch. He's
very promising.
Yeah, he's a speedster, but also has good size to him. He can run you over. He can juke you. Malik Davis, though, is going to be the guy that I think gets the most touches out of the backfield, just because he's more of a balanced runner. He is fast, but he can get you those guaranteed yards that you really want. As far as defense goes, the guy that Myers bringing, who I think was at State, right?
Yeah, Todd Grantham.
Yeah,
Yep.
so he's going to be switching Florida's defense to a 3-4, which is really exciting. I think it plays to the strength of Florida's defense. Florida's probably going to have the best secondary in the conference. They have really good rushing ends, so a 3-4 makes a lot of sense in terms of how you want to deploy the defense. Hopefully, CeCe Jefferson is going to be ready for the start of the season. He had an injury at spring camp, and they're saying that he should be ready for when camp opens up this week. So we'll see. They got a good front seven that underperformed last year, but let's be honest, the entire team underperformed last year.
Yeah, I believe I've read that it was the first time, or I have in front of me here, there's the first time since 2007 that they were outside of the top 15 as far as defense goes.
Yeah, they've been
That's some
defense has always been the consistent part of Florida football.
Yeah.
Even when they were quote unquote bad, you could always guarantee that they would have a defense that kept them in games that they had no business being in.
Right.
Recruiting fell out a lot under McElwain. Say what you will about old Coach Boom, but
We will. Trust
he
us.
consistently had like top 5 recruiting classes at Florida. I mean, he was recruiting at an elite level for sure.
Yeah, he popped in and especially was pulling in that, like Texas and Florida seem to be the richest recruiting grounds, just kind of in general. And he tried to take advantage of that.
Yeah, that was one of the bright spots that he brought to the program. And so that fell off the last several years, but and it looked kind of bad this year, but I think Mullen was able to salvage this class coming into this year. I think they ended up at number 14 nationally. And he's already got a pretty good head start on next year. So it's nice to be even a little excited about Florida football for the first time in probably 5 years.
Yeah, I bet. Here, I'm going to ask you this one quick follow-up question before I turn over to the other guys. But I heard it worded elsewhere that the goal for the 2018 season is to erase the memory of last season. Do you agree with that as being like priority number one is mostly just erase that, and then like next year is when we'll really expect more success? Yeah. I mean, anything that can happen that can remove the stench of what happened it was like last year, like you said, was so bizarre. Florida started out terribly. The offense didn't seem to be fixed after multiple promises that it was getting fixed. And then, Coach McElwain just was kind of, I guess, apathetic about how to respond to like questions about it. He was like, things are fine, things will work out, whatever. And then suddenly he's talking about getting death threats. Right. And the news kind of starts trickling out that wasn't true. Yeah. And now the famed shark wrestler is suddenly out of a job. And like it just kind of came out of nowhere. And
so disappointed that picture's not actually him.
I know.
Oh man, it was weird because like it was definitely him for like a week, and then it was like, no, that wasn't actually him because it looked, it was like doppelganger status. But yeah, so and like once that happens, and you still have, what was it at that point in time, like 5 games left in the season? It's really hard to pick your head up and say, okay, like we still have something to play for when your head coach had clearly given up. Like, and there were stories about, Spurrier being hired on like as a consultant, and he was always looking over McElwain's shoulder, and like they didn't get along well. It was just a mess, and so him leaving was probably the best thing for him and the school. But halfway through the year, when he's lying about stuff like that, and then the coach just leaves randomly, it's anything going forward is better than last year at this point.
Chandler, we've mentioned a few things about the defense in particular. Mullen takes Todd Grantham over there with him. Todd Grantham last season had another one of his signature aggressive defenses, blitzing, having some sort of almost like a blitz on like every play. I don't know what the actual statistics were, but it seemed like he had formulated where you were just basically going after the quarterback as often as possible. He gets some good pass rushers there. He has some cornerbacks that can play on an island. Florida's kind of had that for a few seasons. They've got it again. And then he also has an inside tackle named Tadaro Slayton, who is 6'4", 358 pounds.
Mount Cody lives.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to point him out mostly because of size.
Yeah.
Chandler, how important do you think it is for all of the complaints on offense to reestablish that Florida defense being top 15 at least this season?
This season, I don't think it's massively important. I mean, obviously you want to, if you've got the talent, I think Florida probably does. I mean, you want to get the most out of it. But when you look at the SEC East, I think Florida can be just like pretty good, but not necessarily top 15, and still kind of finish in that 2 or 3 slot, which, to be honest, that's what everybody's playing for. And so, I think Florida can be better. I mean, obviously, I don't know. You always say, well, they can be worse, but I don't expect it. I mean, I think that as much as anything, Mullen and his staff are bringing a culture change to Florida, which seems to be sorely needed. But I don't think it's absolutely vital that they come in and they have to be this, elite, top 15 defense, anything like that. I think they just need to be pretty good, because as much as I hate to give Dan Mullen credit for anything, I watched him turn Chris Relf into a serviceable SEC quarterback.
Sure.
And if he can do that, there's somebody on Florida's roster that he can turn into a serviceable quarterback. And they can, and I think talent-wise alone, they're probably as good as anybody but Georgia. And Georgia's talent is young. So, we'll see there. I mean, I don't know. Like I feel like I'm kind of being the contradiction a little bit today, because I kind of called out Jimbo Fisher. I've never been a huge believer in Todd Grantham. And I distinctly remember a moment watching the Mississippi State Alabama game last year, and there were 2 different plays where one was on offense, and Mullen tried to be the smartest guy in the room, which I think anytime any coach tries to be the smartest guy in the room, it does not go well. Just do what you do. Don't outthink the other guy. Just do what you do. But there was another play, particularly on defense. They were playing fairly conservatively. They were kind of one of the first teams last year to really expose how flawed of a passer Jalen Hurts is, and so they're kind of shutting him down. They're doing a good job, and then they blitz, and he throws a touchdown pass, and that kind of leads to winning the game for him. So
right.
I'm not a huge believer in Todd Grantham. I think he's been good. But as far as this kind of like elite defensive mind, we'll see. But I think their defense will be good. Like we said, they've got a lot of talent. They just gotta get it together, play in a good, get some experience in a new system. And I do think, a 3-4, I think like Keith said, I think a 3-4 kind of fits them athletically better. You've got that massive defensive tackle that can clog the middle. You've got a bunch of really athletic ends and linebackers. Obviously, Florida secondary. I mean, even when they're you don't think they're going to be. And saying Florida secondary is not good might mean they're like the 6th best secondary in the country instead of like even when you think it's not going to be as great of a year, they still find guys. So, I mean, I think really the defense for Florida is something I'm just not even thinking about. It's just all, can you put together anything resembling any sort of consistency? Because that kind of was the name of the game for Mullen at State, was even when they weren't great or explosive offensively, they were consistent. They were going to do what they did. They were going to do it fairly well. And they were almost always going to that weren't as good as them. And I think if he does that at Florida, he's going to be doing a pretty good job.
I think the way I always summed up Mullen was that he was the type of coach who very rarely did he lose games he wasn't supposed to win, but very rarely did he win games he wasn't supposed to win, Yeah. And so
if Florida's a fun team to watch, they're already better than they were the last 2 years.
Sure.
I mean, watching CeCe Jefferson get locked down as that pass rusher and that super young secondary, they're going to be a high event defense, I think, just in terms of like pass rushing, hurrying the quarterback, sacks, interceptions, fumbles, etc. They should be a lot of fun to watch. It's mostly the offense that's going to need to be the huge focus. And Franks I think he's a good quarterback. I think he has a ton of talent. It's just that, last year was such a weird
quarterback
season.
Prospect for a reason,
Right? Yeah, and I don't think that there was a quarterback in the country that could have been in that offense last year that would have looked really good. It was such a disaster.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the only thing that I really think about Florida's offense, especially the quarterback situation, is if you get to a point where you think Emory is your guy, just go with him, because it's like it's hard. I don't know. It's hard to look at that and to kind of think that based on what you saw from Felipe Franks, who. Now, and granted, last year was weird, and again, Mullen does a great job with quarterbacks, but it's hard to kind of look at Florida last year and think Felipe Franks is the guy. He might turn out to be, but I think if you go and you get a guy that's as highly rated as Emory Jones, everybody wanted him. He's that, if he's your guy, Go with him, because I think he probably does more in Mullen's scheme. He does more better in Mullen's scheme than I think Frank seems like he's fit to do.
I think as well too that nobody's mentioned yet that they get 2 great weapons. You might have said it, Keith. I don't remember, but they do actually have 2 transfers from Ole Miss, from Van Jefferson, who was a pretty good receiver there, decent, and then Trayvon Grimes from Ohio State that transfer in this year and are immediately able to play. I mean, if there's one thing to be said about Dan Mullen, he's good with very, very little. And across the board, Florida, even with the bad couple of years that they've had, or the bad few years, the talent on that roster is far better than Mississippi State's. It's going to translate pretty well. I could honestly see Florida putting up a really good game for the world's greatest martini cocktail bowl, whatever it's called. The world's biggest drunken fest.
Yeah, that's it. The world's greatest martini cocktail bowl.
I think that's got the name of this episode.
Yep, that's it. That's it. That's what we're coming in live. Ro, you bring up a great point. I mean, Mullen gets praised a lot. Keith and I have talked about this, but Mullen gets praised a lot for quarterbacks, and that's fine and dandy. I mean, he obviously has produced some solid quarterbacks as that coach. He also has done just a good job. He doesn't get enough credit as an overall player developer, it seems. He takes a lot of guys, as you just said, who get overlooked. You look at some of the guys from Mississippi State who made it into the NFL that were 2- and 3-star recruits,
Yep.
You look at a guy like Jonathan Banks, who won the Thorpe Award. You look at a guy like Darius Slay, who's signing a massive contract with the Lions last season. You're absolutely right, Ro. It doesn't get what Mullen doesn't get enough credit for is his overall player development.
Yeah.
The question is whether that translates to a place where he has a more stacked recruiting field in that sort of regard. Ro, one quick question on the player development before we move on. Felipe Franks was one of the top quarterback recruits coming out of high school. We talked about whether or not he fits, and that's the main question, it seems, because he is a little bit more of a pro style in that he is a tall pocket presence, kind of the strong arm quarterback. Historically speaking, that's not necessarily been Mullen's thing. What do you think, Ro, when you look at that, when you look at Franks, when you look at the quarterback position, what do you see there? I mean, Chandler hinted at maybe they move on, but what do you think? Do you think Mullen can work with that?
The year was 2009.
Mm-hmm.
There was a transition period in Mississippi State's history. Sylvester Croom and his recruits were abysmal and terrible and awful all across the board. And they won quarterback extraordinaire, Tiny Tyson Lee. Tiny Tyson, if you recall, Tiny Tyson Lee is as tall as me. In fact, I stand 5'11.5. Tyson Lee is shorter than me. And look, Tyson Lee did a great job year one of Dan Mullen. Year one. He did a great job. It helped the transition period go very, very well. Felipe Franks is a much better talent, obviously, than Tyson Lee. But I don't really think Florida fans are going to have to worry. I don't think that it's going to be a great year offensively just yet. But the transition is not going to be as bad as maybe some of the people think that it's going to be. I think, honest to God, like he's going to be a guy that is probably actually going to fit Dan Mullen's system pretty well. It goes against everything that I say, or that I know of Dan Mullen to be true, because Felipe Franks is a pretty good talent, top recruit or whatever. But something about Dan Mullen's and these quarterbacks, man, he just, every single one he touches, like, is good, And does it translate to the NFL? Well, it has for a few of them, just a few. Not so much for the Golden Boy Tim Tebow, but for everybody else, he is a quarterback's dude. So I think when it comes to Felipe Franks, he is going to have a pretty good year. Well, not stellar, just pretty good.
I think the biggest advantage that Franks has in Mullen's system, the quarterback is going to run a lot. Franks is 6'5", 230. Which is a quarterback that can run the ball. I mean, at that size, you can kind of take a beating. I mean,
even if you're not fast.
Yeah, that's what Nick Fitzgerald is. That's what Dak Prescott was. I mean, again, like I said,
they also were both significantly faster than Franks, though.
Yeah, but Emory Jones is 6'2", 190. So he'll have to have
get him in that cafeteria as soon as you can. Get him on that.
He also.
Fried chicken Thursday, man.
On the Houston Nut is Crystal open at midnight meal plan.
I mean, and I just
is that what the players would text the assistant coach?
Yeah, hey,
they were asking for money.
For some reason Houston Nut and his attorney are listening to this, please don't sue me. I don't have proof that you actually did that, but
I heard him talking about rebel rags earlier. It's the suit's on. I heard it.
Oh man. Yeah. If Franks is more of a pro passer, at the very least, you have Florida has to look, towards the fact that Mullen at least got, Tyler Russell as a serviceable pro passer didn't fit the system at all, but at least was serviceable and actually, set passing records. Granted, I mean, Mullen was the first offensive coach I think Mississippi State had ever had in their life, outside of the great Emory Millard who invented the wishbone. Different era. So outside of that, I mean, they at least have that to hang their hats on, I guess. Hey, thanks again for listening to this specific individual team preview. If you want more content like this, be sure to subscribe to Running Out the Clock so you don't miss any more of our SEC previews leading up to this season. You can find the full episode that this comes from by searching for our 2018 SEC Preview full episodes. And you'll want to listen to that because we give a verdict at the end of whether or not we feel like the team mentioned will do better, worse, or stay the same. From Running Out the Clock, I'm your friend Joseph Craven. Thanks for listening.